Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend the Momo Fanfics back with the amazing fanfiction. This is series of What If Deku Become a Deadpool? All men aren't created equal. That was a lesson Izuku learned at the young age of 4. In a world where 80% of the population are born with superpowers called quirks, Izuku was one of the 20% who were powerless. Izuku was lying on the ground after taking a beating for being quirkless. The boy who was once his best friend Katsuki Bakugo left his new victim on the ground, and everyone else had abandoned the quirkless child. This wasn't the first time something like this has happened to Izuku. He's been through this since he was 4, and now he's 5. He picked himself up slowly and dusted off his clothes. He began to trudge home with his new bruises and burn marks. Being quirkless is the worst, but I won't give up. I'll be a hero someday, and I'll save everyone with a smile. As Izuku walked up to his mom's apartment, he noticed a strange car outside of the complex. Weird, wonder whose car that is. He tossed open their door and called inside. "Hey Mom, I'm home." There was no response, and he noticed that there were 3 extra pairs of shoes by his mother's shoes. Worried now, he sprinted to the kitchen. "Mom." As he turned into the kitchen, he saw 3 men in business suits talking to his mother, and one of them handed her a large sum of money. Then the adults noticed the young boy in the room. "Oh hey sweetie. These nice men have worked out a way to give quirks to quirkless people. When they help you, you'll be able to be a hero, just like you dreamed of," Inko told her son sweetly. Izuku, who was 5, and was too young and excited to see anything was wrong, replied, "Really? Can I get a quirk now?" "Sure, kiddo, if you come with us, we'll get your quirk by the end of the week." "My name's Ajax, by the way, what's yours?" one of the men in suits said, and he was clearly in charge. "I'm Izuku," Izuku replied, as he was still too naive and trusting to get what was going on. The 3 men lead Izuku down to their car, which was a pitch-black van. Izuku jumped into the back seat, and his mom, who had followed them, buckled him in and got out of the car. Izuku had never been happier until they got to their destination. Almost as soon as they walked into what looked like a hospital's doors, someone grabbed Izuku and strapped him onto an operating table. The next few days were the worst kind of hell Izuku had ever experienced. The doctors in the lab took a sick pleasure in cutting him open, removing things, and adding new stuff back in. They proceeded to tear Izuku apart and to put him back together over and over non-stop for 10 days. And the sadistic bastards never bothered to use Enog, if any, painkillers on him. After the 10 days, Izuku's body was covered in scars. They left his face alone for the most part, so they wouldn't ruin his vision or kill him. Izuku weakly opened his eyes, wishing he wouldn't. Ever since day 2, Izuku had been hoping he wouldn't wake up the next day. Today was different, though. As Ajax himself walked in, he was being followed by 2 people Izuku had gotten well acquainted with. The first was a woman named Angle who had super strength, and following her was a man known as Dr. Kilbrew, who could help some of the injuries inflicted on their patients. Izuku had grown to hate all 3 of these people as they put him through so much suffering. "Come on, Izuku," Ajax said as he undid the restraints holding Izuku on to the operating table. "We've done enough prep work, now we can work on unlocking your quirk." With that, Ajax pulled out a syringe full of a strange blue liquid and shoved it into Izuku's arm. Angle then grabbed the boy without delay and dragged him into the hallway. They dragged him to a new room full of people and torture devices. Izuku then realized that what had been happening to him was about to seem happy compared to the hell that awaited. Before he could try to run, Ajax grabbed Izuku and shoved him into a small freezer compartment. The temperature inside the box was so low Izuku could almost instantly feel his mind going numb. Then, before his vision could completely black out, the door was thrown open and he was pulled out. He was then thrown onto a table, and he realized his body was now very sensitive in the warm room. Before he could do anything, he felt someone snap the bones in his fingers on by one. He screamed in unrivaled agony. Then they broke his arm and his screams turned into whimpers. Dr. Kilbrew started to heal him, and he could feel his bones mending. Before he could get over the throbbing pain in his arms, Angle threw scalding water onto his chest. He screamed so much that day, he tore his throat apart from the inside out. The days never got better. Izuku was thrown onto electrified grates until his body started to smoke. He was stabbed with all kinds of instruments of torture. He was burned with flamethrowers and dipped in acid up to his neck. His skin had been peeled off more than once while he was still awake. At 5 years old, he'd experienced more agony than anyone should in their entire life. And the 3 psychopaths wouldn't let him die. The worst and best day came when Ajax walked into the room with a sick grin on his face. "Well, Izuku, you've reached the final test. This will either awake your quirk," or Ajax started to grin more maniacally. "It will kill you." Then he grabbed the young boy who had long since lost the will to struggle and dragged him over to an Iron Maiden. It looked like a sarcophagus, but from the neck down spikes stuck out of its walls, so that anyone unfortunate enough to be inside would be impaled horribly. Izuku stared at the device in horror. Then, without warning, he found himself stuffed inside as it closed. As soon as the spikes pierced his skin, he realized something horrible. Each spike was an injection needle, and they began to inject sulfuric acid straight into the poor boy's body. The next 10 hours were Izuku's worst nightmare so far. He felt a strange sensation start to build, and then fade, and then build again. To his horror, his quirk had finally awakened, and it was a regeneration ability. He could feel every moment as his body was melted, and then it put itself back together, over and over again. By the time the 10 hours were up, Izuku had started to lose the ability to feel pain. He didn't completely lose it, but it had lessened its hold on him. Ajax opened the door to the Iron Maiden and smiled with glee when he saw Izuku had survived. He then slapped a special metal collar around Izuku's neck as he spoke softly. "Good to see you're still with us, Izuku. I can't wait to see how you do as a gladiator in our DeadPool." Izuku was dragged to one of the places he hated the most, Dr. Kilbrew's lab. The man of the hour was currently stabbing him with all kinds of strange-looking instruments, and seemed to be collecting data. He laughed as he stabbed new instruments into Izuku's chest, piercing his lungs and cracking his ribs. Izuku was forced to lie on the examination table as he was slowly cut apart. "Amazing. Ajax, come look at this." Kilbrew sounded extremely excited. Not that Izuku cared. Ajax walked by Izuku, and something caught Izuku's eye. Izuku then reached out as far as his restraints would let him and grabbed it off Ajax's lab coat. Clueless about what had just happened, Ajax walked over to the computer Kilbrew had been sitting at. He took one look at the screen and smiled. "Excellent. Truly wonderful. We can start using him tonight." Izuku started to panic. But before he could start to struggle, he felt a syringe stab into his neck, and his vision started to fade. "Sleep now, Izuku. You've got a big night tonight." The last thing Izuku saw before blacking out was the smile on Ajax's face that would give villains nightmares. Izuku woke up inside of a cramped rectangular box. The walls were metal, and there was no light inside. The scariest thing was Izuku could feel some kind of collar around his neck. He tried to pull it off of him only to feel an excruciating amount of electricity run through his body. He screamed until it stopped, but no one was around to hear him. He waited in the box for hours until it started to shift. The box jolted and started to move upwards like an elevator. Then, as suddenly as it started, the elevator stopped. Izuku could hear a muffled murmur like a crowd of whispers. Then the box made a loud metallic clicking sound. Then the walls and roof of the box fell away, leaving him standing in a circular dirt field. Across from him was another boy that seemed to be a little older than him and about 6 years old. The edges of the field were marked off by a raised wall about 9 feet high. Then Izuku noticed what this was. A coliseum, and hundreds of people were watching them. Then a spotlight lit up the three people Izuku hated the most. Ajax, Dr. Kilbrew, and Angle were standing on a platform above the spectators. Ajax had a microphone in hand and began to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special treat for you all. As many of you know, most of our society has amazing gifts or quirks, and there are those without those gifts. What many of you don't know is that with the right methods, one can force a quirkless person like Izuku over there. A bright spotlight fell over Izuku, nearly blinding him. To develop a gift much like a quirk. It's a mutation, and he's our first and currently our only mutant. The difference between our quirks and their mutations is that they don't have to suffer any backlash. The crowd suddenly went silent. And to prove what I'm saying is true, we've put two regenerators into the ring tonight. One with a quirk, the other a mutant. Once we perfect the mutation and control process, we'll be selling these super slaves for the right price. But first, let's see these two kill each other. The crowd started to cheer, and Izuku felt his blood run cold. Two weapons were dropped into the ring in the middle of both boys, an axe and a katana. Izuku looked up and saw fires of determination behind the other boy's eyes. He doesn't want to die, and he'll do anything to live, Izuku realized. The other boy charged forward, grabbing the axe as he ran. Izuku just sat there, stunned by what he had heard. He came back to reality only to feel an axe head bury itself deep into his shoulder. The boy then kicked him in the chest and ripped the axe out of him as he fell. Izuku could feel the bones in his shoulder and his flesh mend back together. But the pain was excruciating. He turned and tried to run from the older boy, who threw his axe at the retreating Izuku. The axe buried itself into the wall. Izuku changed directions and ran past the boy who went to retrieve his axe. Izuku tripped as he was halfway across the arena. He rolled onto his back to see the other boy walking towards him with his axe raised high overhead. Izuku started to crawl away backwards until he felt a grip in his hand. He grabbed onto the object for dear life and swung it in front of himself in a last-ditch effort to survive. As he clenched his eyes shut, he felt a sickening squelch as his attack hit home. Izuku slowly opened his eyes to see the damage he'd wrought. The boy's arm slowly slid off his body, and the stub began to spray blood in time with the boy's heartbeat. Then, much to Izuku's horror, the boy collapsed to his knees, and his head fell back off his shoulders to the ground. The headless corpse pitched forward, sending a fountain of blood from his neck. Izuku's eyes widened as the blood splashed across his face and chest. The boy's body convulsed and then went limp as Izuku realized he couldn't heal from the damage he'd caused. The poor 5-year-old's mind broke as he came to the realization that he'd just killed the other boy. Izuku slowly got to his feet as the crowd cheered and gave a thunderous round of applause for the horrific act they just witnessed. Izuku just stood there in a daze as a man wearing a black wolf mask walked over and began to lead him away. He was still gripping the katana like it was his lifeline. As he left the arena, Izuku soon found himself in a small concrete room with an iron cot in one far back corner and a toilet in the other. He stood in the middle of the room as reality came crashing in on him, and he slowly crawled into bed, and then he cried himself to sleep. That was the day the boy named Izuku Midoriya lost his mind. Izuku slowly began to wake up and look around his new room. He then realized his now shattered mind had shattered his perspective of reality. Alrighty readers, let's get some stuff down so we don't waste the author's note space. When you see underlined text, it's just me breaking the fourth wall. I underlined it to piss off Dante because he'd have to switch back and forth. Now I might talk to you all out loud like right now, or I might think it to you all. Finally, you're all terrible people since you're enjoying a story about me suffering. Shit, gotta go, someone's coming. The door to Izuku's room slowly opened and Ajax walked through, followed closely by Angle. They watched the katana in Izuku's hand carefully before addressing the boy. Well, Izuku, you won. And to make sure you keep winning, you get 2% of the earnings to invest in weapons, since I don't know how you'll want to fight from now on. Also, you either keep killing or that collar you're wearing will kill you," Ajax said with a sick grin. Izuku just stood there as his eyes widened at what he was told to do. Then Ajax left, as Izuku came to realize that the rest of his life was going to be a living hell. Years passed and Izuku was now 10. In the fights, whenever he was a content, it was no longer a bet on if he'd live or not, it was how will he kill the next challenger. Dante, that whole 5-year time skip was lazy. Izuku sat in the metal box waiting for his next fight. "Don't ignore me, asshole." He was fully decked out in the gear he'd gotten from winning other fights. "Fuck you too then." He had 2 of his favorite katanas, 3 combat knives strapped to each leg, and a full set of Kevlar and spandex armor, and I make it look good. He looked older than before, but he was more muscular now, though his scars were still quite prevalent. Dante left my face alone though, so I don't look like DeadPool, or for those of you that don't know, like an avocado hate fucked an older, more disgusting avocado. Wait, will we get in trouble for saying this shit? He waited quite impatiently for the start of the fight. The box started to open and Izuku fell silent. He was one of those people who got really serious and quiet if he had to do something as sick as this. To him, it was a sign of respect to the innocent person he was being forced to kill. Today the box opened up to reveal an adult standing across from him. Based off the costume still on the man, Izuku thought he was a hero who had been captured by these sick people. His outfit was a ninja costume with a large sword across his back. The sword seemed to be his only weapon and was about 5 feet long. The man was looking around quickly until his eyes landed on Izuku. "Hey kid, what's going on? Who are these people? Where are we?" He sounded panicked. Izuku sighed as he realized he was being forced to play the role of an executioner. "We're in a fighting arena. We're going to be forced to kill each other. I'm sorry it had to be this way." The man didn't seem to understand he was going to die to a 10-year-old. "Me too, kid. After I get out of here, I'll make sure these people are arrested for what they're doing here. And for what they did to you." Then almost poetically a light fell on Ajax as he introduced the fighters. "You all know him. Our first fighter is our golden boy, the unkillable Izuku. And unknown to most of you, we have a European hero known as a man who can kill any crime with one swing of his massive sword. We have Slash." Ajax smiled and pointed theatrically at both fighters. Izuku stared at the now named Slash as he stared back nervously. Then a loud bell-like sound went off, signaling the start of the fight. The hero blitzed Izuku with astounding speed. He ripped his sword from its sheath as fast as lightning and struck Izuku with the flat of the blade. This caused Izuku's head to explode on impact, splattering on the walls of the arena. Slash was stunned, however, as Izuku's body didn't fall over. Instead, the newly exposed area of his neck and what was left of his head began to bubble. Slash stepped back as a new head formed to take the place of the one he smeared across the walls. Izuku glared at the hero and drew one of his combat knives from his right leg and charged Slash. The hero tried to take a step back, but Izuku caught him and pulled him closer. Then before Slash could defend himself, Izuku drove his knife through the underside of the hero's chin up through his brain. The man's body convulsed for about 30 seconds before finally going still. Then Izuku ripped his knife from its new sheath and cleaned it on Slash's costume. As the crowd cheered his name, Izuku couldn't help but feel disgusted by Slash, as he didn't even think twice about trying to kill him, even though he was a hero. Izuku slowly walked back to his room. Nowadays, he didn't need the guards to drag him there. He sat in his room waiting for his next fight. 2 more years had passed and Izuku was now 12. Even though he'd been fighting for Ajax, the torture had never stopped. On the upside, I can't get scars anymore. He sat in his box waiting for his next fight and slightly dreading it, as Ajax had promised it would be a special one. And anything that guy calls special and smiles about is going to be something fucked up. There was a loud metal clang as the box once again opened. This time, however, Izuku saw not one but 2 people across from him. And when he looked to his left, there was a girl who seemed to be a little younger than him standing next to him. Once again, a light fell around Ajax, Dr. Kilbrew, and Angle as they explained what was going on. Two of these people are mutants. They are the only two in existence currently. The two people besides them are two weak quirk users that they have to protect. If one of the teammates dies, the other dies too, courtesy of those nice collars around their necks. The crowd quieted as they watched the spectacle before them. A loud bell went off, starting the fight. The older girl on the other side charged right at them. She was covered in a metal armor, and the ground cracked with each step she took. Then she screamed at them. "I'm a juggernaut, bitches." Izuku looked at his teammate quickly and spoke. "Try to stay away from her as best you can." Then he charged forward. As soon as they met in the center of the ring, Izuku drew his sword. He swung his katana at her unprotected head, but as soon as his sword made contact with her skin, it shattered. Then she reared back her right fist and punched Izuku in the chest. He coughed blood as his ribs folded in on his lungs. Then the girl grabbed his face and threw him behind her. He landed about 15 feet from the girl's partner, but he couldn't get to his feet yet. Izuku looked behind him to see that the Juggernaut girl was chasing his partner and slowly gaining on her. He swore and slowly drew one of his combat knives. As soon as the boy's eyes left him to the chase, Izuku stood and threw his knife. The Juggernaut looked over her shoulder to see Izuku throw the knife. "Inuwu," she shrieked as the knife seemed to move in slow motion through the air. The knife flipped one final time as it buried itself up to the handle in the boy's eye, killing him instantly. Izuku looked over his shoulder in time to see the Juggernaut girl looking terrified. A light on her collar went red, then it exploded, taking her head with it. The girl Izuku was protecting then fell to her hands and knees and threw up on the ground. Izuku walked out of the arena as Ajax announced their victory. He was headed back to his room. Izuku was sitting on his iron cot waiting for tomorrow, when they'd get him for the next fight. He was shocked when his door was thrown open a mere 10 minutes after the fight. His doorway was darkened by a man in a black tiger mask, who shoved the girl he'd been protecting in the last fight into his room. "She's your problem now," the tiger-masked man said coldly, and then he left, slamming the door. Izuku looked at the girl before him coldly. Then she looked up at him with big brown doe eyes that were full of hope. Izuku then, against his will, felt his now stone-cold heart melt just a little. He sighed and helped the girl to her feet. She seemed weary of him, so he tried to give her a comforting smile. She took one look at him and began to laugh. Izuku sighed. "Better than being scared of me, I guess." The girl stopped laugh and watched him cautiously again. "I'm not going to hurt you," Izuku said, exasperated. "You hurt them," she said nervously. "Yeah, and it was them or us. Now what's your name?" Izuku was tired from the interaction already. "Emma." She sounded terrified of him. "You got a last name, Emma?" he said as he rubbed the top of her head in an attempt to calm her down. "Frost," she said as she nuzzled into his hand. Izuku began to notice two strange lumps in her hair. "Well, Miss Frost, it feels like you got hit on the head. Do you mind if I take a look?" Izuku said, and then to his surprise she jumped away from him, and two feline ears stuck up through her white hair in alarm. Is that your quirk?" She nodded slowly. "My parents look like actual snow leopards, but I got a weaker version of it and only have a few leopard parts." Then she burst into tears the same way Izuku used to. "Maybe they were embarrassed that I didn't look like them, and that's why they gave me away," she whimpered. Izuku moved forward and gave her a comforting hug. "It's okay. I'll get you out of her. But we need to focus on surviving our fights, okay?" She nodded to him. They might not have realized it yet, but this relationship was starting to piece the broken boy back together. A month had passed, and now Izuku and Emma were both strapped to hospital operation tables. Ajax and Kilbrew were currently deciding what to do to them today. Well, now that she's got a protector, we can give her some big kid torture, Ajax said while watching the two smugly. Emma started to cry when she heard this. Izuku, who had enough of Ajax's shit, started to smile. Hey, don't take any shit from him, Emma. Ajax and Kilbrew looked over at him amused while Emma seemed confused. But Izuku carried on. I mean, how tough can he be with a name like Francis? As soon as Izuku had said that, Ajax was glaring daggers at him. Why don't you just shut the fuck up? Or I'll sew you mouth shut. Ha ha ha. Now why would that scare me? I can heal from anything you throw at me. And besides, you torture us all the time, you can't really step it up from there. Izuku said, all while having a smug grin because of the death glare he was getting from Ajax. Oh, by the way, I snagged the dry cleaning tag from you lab coat last chapter. Ajax snatched the tag away from Izuku irritatedly. Kilbrew, take her back to her room. We're going to show Izuku what true pain is. Kilbrew nodded and dragged Emma away before returning a few minutes later. When Kilbrew re-entered the room, Izuku looked at both of them smugly. What are you gonna do, Francis? Leave me and Jared here in a soundproof room? That'll only end in him getting more child rape charges, and he can't do that, or he'll get the death penalty. Ajax looked stunned, but Dr. Kilbrew's reaction was mortified. What the hell did you say? His voice was quiet, and he seemed disgusted. Hey, did you get the doctor title as a pediatrician? Is that why you're working with Dickless here? They tried to take your license, Izuku said, completely enjoying himself. Now, for the first time since Izuku met him, Kilbrew looked pissed. Ajax, I think we should get rid of him. Francis smiled at him. I concur. He responded quickly. Boys, Izuku started in a mocking sing-song tone. You can't kill me even if you want to, since I'll heal. Besides, I'm your best moneymaker, and you can't give that up, can you? He smirked since Izuku thought he had them beat. Well, personally, I don't think you're worth the headache, Ajax said simply. Besides, I think we've come up with a way to overload your healing, so we could kill you. Izuku started to panic until he was struck in the face with an incredible amount of force, and he blacked out. Angle, who had walked in, was the one to hit Izuku in the face, knocking him out. She then undid the restraints and carried him for Ajax and Kilbrew. Izuku woke up to find himself in a strange metal and glass tube. He tried to move, but realized he was strapped in. He looked out on the room outside his cage. He was in a new lab, but this one was filled with giant canisters of liquids. Then Francis walked into his view with a sadistic grin on his face. Oh great, this bag of dicks is still here. Comment if you hate this asshole too. Francis just stared at the clear signs of insanity before him. He decided to stop it before it went on for too much longer. Izuku, I bet you're wondering what you're currently sitting in is. Izuku snapped his attention back to Francis. Not really, I am looking forward to when it fails, and you throw a tantrum though. Ajax, now even more annoyed, decided to explain anyway. You're currently sitting in a sealed and pressurized chamber that I'm going to take all the air out of. That will put stress on your healing factor, then I'm going to fill it with acids to further the stress on your healing factor. Then finally this machine, he says as he gestures at the control panel next to him, will pump a cocktail of poisons and toxins into your body to finish you off. Then we'll burn your corpse to make sure you're just an unpleasant memory. What the fuck is wrong with you? Izuku was staring at Francis dumbfounded. Well, I'm just trying to enjoy myself while making money, but you just piss me off, Francis stated simply. Now let's get started. With that, he reached over and pressed a button on the control panel near him. Izuku started to struggle as he could no longer breathe. Ajax, however, stood up and began to leave. I'll check in on you tomorrow, have fun. Izuku tried to call out to the man, but without air he couldn't make his voice work. He began to really panic as a yellow acid began to bubble up from the bottom of the tube. While Izuku was still trying to breathe, the level of acid slowly began to rise. As soon as the acid touched the mat Izuku was strapped to, it began to dissolve it. When the acid reached Izuku's feet, it instantly burned him to the bone. Izuku tried to scream, but without air he was still unable to produce sound. The acid soon reached up to Izuku's waist, where it stopped rising. Izuku's healing factor was keeping his bones together, but it left him in a constant state of pain. Then, while he was wincing from the pain, he glanced over at the Ivs in his arm, and his eyes went wide in terror at what he saw. There was a blue concoction of toxins and poisons rushing towards his veins. As soon as the poison entered his system, Izuku noticed how fuzzy his vision started to get. After about 5 minutes, Izuku felt like his organs were on fire. The poisons were currently tearing him apart from the inside out. His organs were liquefying inside him and leaking into the pool of acid below him, which turned it from yellow to green. The poison was blue. Izuku continued to struggle in pain for 10 more minutes before his world went black and his body went limp. Ajax walked back into the lab the next day with Angle at his heels. Their eyes quickly landed on Izuku's body. From the waist down, the acid had eaten away all the soft tissue, leaving only bones behind. His eyes had melted and left a residue on his face from where they leaked out of their sockets and ran to the pool below. His mouth was caked with dried blood he'd hacked up, and his skin now seemed to hang on him loosely. He was once full of energy, but now he was still, and his body had already started to go cold. Ajax smiled whole. He looked over his handiwork. But Angle looked at the boy in the canister in disgust. "Angle, why don't you get a few grumps to take him the morgue's incineration room?" Ajax said as he turned, leaving his partner with the body. Without saying a word, Angle went and found the 2 nearest guards and lifted them into the air. She carried them to the room Izuku was in and dropped them on the floor. "Get rid of that." And without another word, she left them. The 2 men looked at each other in confusion for a few moments before one spoke up. "Why the hell do we always get stuck with the shittiest jobs? We never do anything other than clean up Ajax's disgusting messes." "I know, but we can't do anything, or we'll become those messes," the other replied. "Let's just take care of this and get out of here. It smells like shit." "Yeah, you're right." The 2 then drained the tube of the acid while being extremely careful as not to touch any of it. Then they grabbed the horror show of a body and threw it unceremoniously into a body bag they had brought with them. They each picked up an end of the bag and carted it over to the base's morgue. Once they reached their destination, they threw the bag onto a table with a loud crash and left it for someone else to deal with. Outside of the horrifying hospital and fighting ring facility, a group of pro-heroes were gathering. Their operation was being led by Nezu, the principal of the prestigious My Hero Academy. His quirk high specs gave him super intelligence that would be highly useful in a mission like this. Along with him were a few of the top 10 pros. There was All Might, the number 1 hero, as well as Endeavor, the number 2 hero, and Best Jeanist, the number 4 hero. There were also a few other heroes along with them, such as Midnight, Eraserhead, President Mike, Rukyu, Ectoplasm, Cementos, Gran Torino, and Recovery Girl. This was one of the biggest operations in history, as they were raiding a huge organization. But their main goal was to free as many of their victims as they could. None of these heroes had any idea of the horrors they'd see inside this place. "All right, listen up everyone. We'll need to be fast about this operation, and we need to plan everything through completely," Nezu, the strange rodent thing, said. "All Might and Best Jeanist will deal with the fighting arena area." The 2 mentioned heroes stepped off to the side. Midnight, Eraserhead, and Cementos will go to the holding cells. Those 3 also took a step to the side. Endeavor will head to the morgue. Endeavor just scowled at Nezu. "Everyone else will head to the labs aside from me and Recovery Girl, who will be treating the wounds of any escapees." Abai questions. Endeavor scowled as he stepped forward threateningly. "I'm a better hero than Jeanist, so why are you sending me to deal with some corpses?" His words were filled with rage, but Nezu just stared Ba coldly. "You aren't careful with your quirk. and in the arena, you could end up killing one of the people we're trying to save. Besides, even if you burn all the evidence in the morgue to the ground, we'll still have enough with all the kidnapping cases to have every one of these monsters locked up for life." Endeavor grumbled under his breath, but stopped arguing and took a step back. "Now, if there are no more questions, let's get started." The operation began when All Might smashed a hole in the roof of the arena and landed in the middle of a fight. "Have fear, villains. Why? Because we are here." With his signature entrance, Best Jeanist landed next to him and took a fighting stance. Ajax, who was standing in his normal booth, grabbed the mic and yelled, "Contestants, kill the heroes or you lose." Both the boys in the ring looked at each other, then to the heroes. "Please forgive me," was their war cry as they charged the two pros. All Might charged forward and slammed his fists into both boys' stomachs, knocking both of them out. Then he ripped the control collars off and threw them into the air precious seconds before they exploded. "What kind of monsters could do this to children?" Best Jeanist asked as both heroes jumped into the stands. Ajax, Angle, and Kilbrew had already abandoned their patrons and fled the scene. In another part of the compound, Eraserhead, Midnight, and Cementos were rushing through the holding areas as fast as they could. The alarms were going off, signifying that All Might had begun his assault. But much to the pros' dismay, the guards in the area didn't go running to help their comrades. They went to execute the children they were keeping so the heroes couldn't get to them. Their groups was running through the halls, not even bothering to open doors since they were aiming for the guards, so they wouldn't have a chance to kill more of the children they were holding prisoner. Their group came up on the last group of guards, who were opening another door with guns aimed inside. There were 4 for them, but while they were distracted, Eraserhead attacked without mercy. His scarf capture weapon to grab 2 of the guards and slammed their heads together with a sickening crack. The other 2 turned to aim their guns at the pros. Midnight, filled with fear at the thought of losing her friend, stepped forward and whipped one of the guards across the face. He fell to the ground, clutching his face in pain. His gun fell to the floor. Before the final guard could fire his weapon, a small white-haired bullet shot from the room and latched onto his face. The pros froze as they watched a small whirlwind of claws, teeth, and a small blade attacked the man relentlessly. It took 10 seconds for the man to drop his gun to use both hands to try to pry his assailant off. But before he could, she had cut his jugular. Then 20 more seconds of scratching and stabbing later, the man finally lay still. The 3 pros were left staring at a small girl with white cat ears and a tail. Her feline eyes were locked on them in fear. She was wearing what looked like a hospital gown, but seemed to be a full dress. It was now covered in blood. The knife in her hands was shaking as she pointed it at them defensively. "Who are you?" she asked fearfully. "We're heroes. We're here to rescue all of you," Eraserhead said calmly as he slowly edged towards the knife-wielding girl. The girl suddenly dropped the knife and rushed forward. She grabbed onto Eraserhead's shirt and wouldn't let go. "Where's Izuku? Did you save him too?" She was crying and her eyes were still full of fear. "Who's Izuku?" Midnight asked slowly. Then she noticed her friend Eraserhead, who was always a cat lover, was petting the girl's head like he would his own house cat. "Shota, cut that out." Eraserhead looked embarrassed and took his hand away from the girl's head, but the girl looked saddened. "Why, you haven't seen him?" she sniffed. "He's a green-haired boy who's immortal. He takes care of me." She looked like she was about to start crying. "It's okay, little one," Cementos said in his gravely voice. "We haven't searched all the rooms yet. Do you know which one is his?" The girl nodded and pointed back into her room. Midnight raised her eyebrows and crouched down to her level. "The 2 of you stay in the same room." The girl nodded once again. This time Midnight smiled one of her evil smiles. "So is he your boyfriend?" The girl's face went bright red and she ran back into her room. Eraserhead glared at Midnight. "Good going, you just made everything so much harder." Midnight didn't have the decency to look ashamed as the 3 pros walked slowly into the room. The girl was trying to hide in a corner. "Hey kiddo, we didn't ask what's your name," Eraserhead asked, trying to calm the child back down. Emma," the girl answered slowly. Then the room shook as explosions filled the halls of the prison-like holding area. The hallways collapsed, and the four of them were now stuck in Emma and Izuku's room. Endeavor walked into the morgue confidently. He didn't even try to hide his presence. His plan was a simple one. Go and burn everyone alive, then leave. He was hoping to try and get done with enough time to make it to the fighting arena before All Might and Best Jeanist had finished up. The circumstances that this fight had been set up with were ideal for Endeavor. Without the media to judge him, he could just kill everyone here. And since he was in a morgue, no one would be able to say if he'd killed these people or if they were already there. Just as Nezu had predicted, Endeavor's indiscriminate attacks had set the room ablaze. Endeavor moved from the room he was in to a new one as his flames crawled up the walls and began to lick at the ceiling. The room he'd entered was filled with body bags. No matter what the media says, Endeavor still had a heart inside of him, and the thought of what would await these children's bodies sickened him. He made a split-second decision and set the room ablaze. Then he put his hand together in a prayer. "I pray you all find peace and happiness in your next lives." As he turned to leave, one of the bags began to thrash and jump. Thinking it was one of the scientists who tried to escape him, Endeavor walked over and tore the bag open. A boy about 10 years old was thrown unceremoniously at his feet. He was only wearing a shirt, his lower body was naked. The boy stood and snatched the remains of the bag from Endeavor's hands. He wrapped it around his waist to help him keep his modesty. The green-haired boy looked at Endeavor quickly. "Where are we?" he demanded. "The morgue," Endeavor replied, dumbfounded. "Good, I have a stash of supplies in here," the boy said before he ran off. When the boy left his sight, Endeavor came back to his senses and chased after him. He ran around a corner and saw the boy adjusting a glove he'd just put on. He was now covered in a red Kevlar and spandex body armor. He was also armed to the teeth with weapons. He had 2 sidearm pistols on his hips and ammo clips strapped to his belt. He had combat knives strapped to his legs, arms, and chest. And to top it all off, he had 2 katanas on his back in an X shape. The boy turned and looked at Endeavor and smiled. "Thanks, I've been looking for an opportunity to escape this shithole for a while now. But since you're here with a few other pros, I assume I can get my friend on to get the fuck out of here." Without another word, the boy ran off, once again leaving Endeavor dumbfounded. The operation had been going exactly as planned for All Might and Best Jeanist until Ajax and his 2 lackeys ran off. They'd activated the whole building's self-destruct sequence, giving the heroes little time to hunt them down or rescue their victims. All Might was throwing the spectators left and right as Best Jeanist pulled the 2 boys into the center of the arena. Before the fight could go on for too much longer, the roof began to collapse, crushing the people beneath it. All Might rushed to his colleague's side and cue at the large slab of concrete that was falling towards his head. The room caved in around them, leaving them trapped in the little cave All Might had created. Izuku was running through the burning section of the building trying to get back to Emma. When he turned another corner, the last person he wanted to see ran into him. Both Izuku and Ajax were startled by the other's sudden appearance. Ajax looked over his shoulder and bellowed, "Angle, take Kilbrew and get the car started. I'll be there as soon as I deal with this annoying prick." Izuku drew his blades as Ajax grabbed the nearest weapon to him, a piece of rebar sticking out of a burning wall. The wall collapsed without the added support of the bar, exposing the room on the other side. The 2 swung their weapons at each other with reckless abandon. Each time the red-hot rebar met one of the blades, the 2 fighters were blinded by a shower of sparks. Their fight would have continued, but a wooden beam from the ceiling came crashing down onto Izuku's head and drove him to the floor. Capitalizing on his downed opponent, Ajax stabbed the bar through Izuku's back and drove it into the floor. He then grabbed the end of the bar he'd been using as a handle and bent it, trapping Izuku in place. He leaned down to Izuku's face and said, It's a good thing you didn't kill me since I'm the only one who could tell you who I sold your little girlfriend to." Izuku's eyes went wide, and then Ajax turned and left his opponent to burn in Endeavor's careless flames. Nezu stared at the wreckage that the heroes had left behind. The morgue had been burned to the ground and was still smoldering. The arena and the holding cells had been collapsed with explosives, and currently only Endeavor and the team sent to the labs had returned. Endeavor was stunned that the boy who seemed armed to the teeth hadn't gotten outside with his friend since he seemed so prepared. Nezu had a locator on All Might's hero outfit, so their team was currently being dug out of the wreckage. Gran Torino was the one to see his student first see. "Nezu, we've got him," he yelled as he pulled the two unconscious children to safety. President Mike and Rukyu pulled their colleagues from their little cave. Nezu watched as his former students were rescued, but he found himself being drawn to the smoldering morgue. He walked through the ashes in hopes to find something to help them look for the three that got away. Something moved in the ashes that caught Nezu's attention. A head of green hair pushed itself to the surface of the ashes. Nezu rushed to the boy who was crawling out of the ashes. The first thing Nezu noticed was the bent rebar sticking out of the boy's chest. Nezu grabbed the bar and pulled it free so Recovery Girl could fix his wounds. Before Nezu called out to her, he noticed what the kid was wearing. He was in a scorched Kevlar and spandex body armor suit. He was also armed to the teeth. The boy looked over at Nezu and smiled. "Hi, my name is Izuku." He then stood up and began to stretch, as though he'd never been impaled. "I'm Nezu," the rodent principal said calmly. Izuku smiled at Nezu. "Hey, do you think you could help me find the people who ran this place? I want to force one of them to tell me where they sent my friend." Nezu's quirk flared. It not only gave him super intelligence, but it also gave him gut feelings that were almost never wrong. Currently, it told him that not helping this kid would be a bad idea. "Sure. Why, you can call UA when you need new info on their group," he said cautiously and slightly fearfully. Izuku's smile widened to an impossible degree. "Thanks, I owe you one. Get a hold of me whenever you need a favor done, and I help you out however I can." Nezu paused for a moment before he realized something. "Wait, how would I be able to find you?" Izuku stopped. "Just watch the news and you find me. I mean, hey, it worked for Colossus." Nezu was confused by Izuku's strange ramblings, but the boy had wandered off before he could say anything else to him. A few more hours had passed when Eraserhead's team was dug out of the small cell. Eraserhead walked out of the room carrying the sleeping snow leopard quirk user in his arms. Nezu's eyes raised as he saw the protective way Shota carried the girl, and Midnight hovered around them. "So what are you going to do with that girl?" Nezu asked bluntly. "Midnight and I are going to take care of her," Eraserhead said in a cold tone, and no one argued with his decision. The pro heroes had taken the girl they'd rescued to UA, and were currently waiting in the teacher's lounge for her to wake up. Aizawa was currently petting her head like one would a common house cat, much to his colleague's exasperation. Suddenly Emma's head snapped up, and she leaped away from the adults with cat-like grace. Her eyes darted from person to person rapidly, then they fixed themselves to the door. She tensed up, preparing to make a desperate bid for freedom when Nezu addressed her. "Good morning, Emma." He spoke calmly and softly in an attempt to put her at ease. "You needn't fear, no one's going to hurt you. We rescued you from that horrid place." Emma's eyes locked onto the rodent principal with a fire in them that no one could place. She quickly blinked it away, and concern took over her expression. "Where's Izuku? Did you save him too?" The fear in her voice was palpable, and the adults glanced at each other nervously. Nezu remembered the name of the boy who crawled out of the ashes. As he was about to tell Emma he was fine, she spoke again. "Dr. Kilbrew said they found a way to kill him. Please tell me you saved him before they could." Nezu's blood ran cold the second he heard that name. His fists clenched as he addressed Emma again. "What was the name of the man you said was trying to kill you, friend?" His voice was shaking in cold fury. Emma glanced at the rodent confused. Dr. Kilbrew, why do you know him? Nezu closed his eyes, and he saw the evil man who tortured him in the name of science. He wanted to know how Nezu had developed a quirk, but he also just enjoyed causing the suffering of others. Then Nezu thought of the boy who was armed to the teeth with a look in his eye, like he'd kill every last one of those bastards. A plan formed in Nezu's mind. Shota, could you take her into the hallway, please? The teacher nodded and walked Emma out. The second the door closed, everyone turned to Nezu. Midnight spoke up first. What's going through your head, Nezu? Nezu looked up at the pros surrounding him. All Might was the only one to have left as he needed to see Sir Naitai. Nezu hoped that this wouldn't be a problem. Oh, it will be. What, didn't think I'd break the fourth wall when I wasn't in the story? Well, it's my story, so I'll do whatever the fuck I want so long as Dante doesn't get a hold of me. The boy Izuku, I saw him after the mission ended. The other pros seemed to liven up at the statement. Then let's grab him and get these two kids back together, yeah. President Mike seemed very enthusiastic. Nezu raised a hand to silence the heroes that were murmuring their agreement. He thought those monsters still had Emma abbed, he was going after them. This created another round of murmuring and President Mike once again voicing his opinion. We need to stop him and get him back here. He was already starting to walk out the door when Nezu jumped off the chair he was standing on and grabbed Mike's hand. That's what I wanted to talk about. When Izuku left to go find those monsters, he was armed to the teeth. I believe his plan was to kill all of them. Everyone in the room froze and Nezu capitalized on it. I propose that we let him go after those people. Based on all the shocked expressions Nezu was getting, he could assume he had their attention. Emma said that Kilbrew had found a way to kill Izuku, but considering the condition he was in when I found him, it failed. If he's trying to kill them, and they can't kill him, I say we let him. The room went into an uproar. Nezu, what the hell, heroes are supposed to protect people, and they don't kill. Midnight shrieked. Nezu, what the hell, Midnight's right, we don't kill. Ruki roared. I can't believe you'd even suggest that. Mike screamed, Nezu, you can't let your feelings cloud your judgment. Recovery Girl warned. Enough. Nezu's voice cut through the uproar in the room. Heroes might not kill, but that doesn't mean we have to save them from Izuku. Besides, if he doesn't kill them, they'll just keep kidnapping and killing people. Now that's the last I want to hear of it. Many of the heroes didn't like Nezu's plan, but they didn't voice their opinions and risk raising his ire. Izuku, however, was preparing to go on his Revenge World Tour. He was currently hunting down one of the enforcers that worked in the prison area of the compound. The enforcers were basically prison guards, but they liked to kill people. Whenever anyone tried to escape, the enforcers killed whoever was in charge and dragged everyone else back to their cells. The enforcer that Izuku was currently going was one of the ones that patrolled his cell block. His quirk was mostly useless, he could only turn his arms into rubber. That includes his nerve endings. So it was really only good for riot control. So he was usually the one to stop the stronger rioters since he could block their attack without feeling any pain. That said, out of all the enforcers Izuku had seen, he was the wimpiest. All it took was a small cut to make him start to freak out in pain. Izuku's plan was to find him and beat Francis's location out of him. Izuku stalked the poor, unsuspecting man back to his suburban home. It was in the middle of a cul-de-sac and was a 2-story building. Izuku walked up to the door, remembering all the times Nithai's guard and his buddies had beaten him and Emma when they were being transported from place to place. He drew one of his katanas and kicked the door open with an honest-to-God smile on his face. The door swung open wide with a loud bang, and the occupant jumped from the couch to his feet. Izuku threw one of his combat knives into his upper leg, causing him to drop to the ground in pain. Izuku jumped over the couch and grabbed the man's scalp and dragged him into his bathroom. All the while he was screaming his lungs out. Stop, please. That hurts, please stop. Somebody please help me. Izuku got sick of the screaming, so he slammed the man's face into the floor hard. He stopped, screamed, and just started softly whimpering. Izuku turned on the private bathtub without letting go of his scalp. Now I bet you're wondering why this is happening to you. Isn't that right, Kyle? My name is. I'll ask the questions here. Now you're going to tell me where your boss is. Now the bathtub had started to overflow with water, and Izuku moved Kyle's face right over the surface of the water. Kyle started whimpering again. Then he went to begging. Please don't burp me. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Izuku smiled again under his mask. Good, now where the fuck is your boss? Kyle nodded. Okay. He's trying to leave the country. If I had to guess, I'd say he's on his way to Europe right now. Izuku nodded. Thanks for that. Then he reached around him and pulled the drain free in the tub and shut off the water. Kyle looked at Izuku in confusion. You're not even going to make sure I was telling the truth? Nah. I know you're too much of a pussy to do that, Izuku said in a mocking voice. Then Kyle tried to walk out of the room, and Izuku stopped him. Hey, where do you think you're going? I told you everything you wanted to know. Doesn't that mean we're done? Fear was creeping back into his voice. Nope, I still want some revenge. Then, before Kyle could respond, Izuku grabbed the back of his head and shoved his face into the toilet bowl. Izuku made sure his nose and mouth were submerged in the water. The struggling barely fazed Izuku as he drowned his first revenge victim. Izuku held him in the water until his arms went still, and he just sat there limply with his head stuck in the bowl. I figured it'd be more embarrassing to die with your head in the shitter than a bathtub. Let me know what you all think. Also, I left whoever found him a nice surprise. But don't worry, I washed my hands before I left. Izuku ran out of the back of the house and could already hear the telltale sounds of police sirens in the distance. Before they arrived, he disappeared into the night. Izuku had wandered the streets for a few hours before he'd found an old run-down house that had been abandoned. He kicked open the door and walked in like he owned the place. Which, as far as I'm concerned, I do. Then he started dropping off his weapons on an old half-rotten table. Izuku started to go over his plans mentally. Shit, I don't have enough money to pay for a trip to Europe. Fuck, I don't even have the money for new gear. His suit was scorched beyond redemption, and one of his katanas had been melted into scrap in its sheath. I'll just hunt down a few more of Francis's remaining goons and take their money to repair my gear. But how will I get to Europe? I guess Dante will just have to drop a big pile of plot convenience at my feet for me. With that, Izuku went to bed after planning which one of the few remaining of Francis's bases to hit. He'd heard about these late at night when he couldn't sleep, and he'd eavesdrop on the guards in the compound, though there weren't many. Besides, this'll be a great way for me to get more info on Francis's, and all of you will get what you want. Me killing people in weird or normal ways while making jokes. The first base on Izuku's list was a small fighting ring. It was set up in an old wrestling arena, and people were now watching. To women with the same kind of control collars Izuku had tried to beat each other though death. Izuku sees the man in charge standing proudly by the edge of the arena. His quirk was pretty good. It was a strength enhancer type, but the downside was it only worked if he wasn't afraid. Izuku smiled to himself as he looked over and saw a leftover basket of sports equipment. He reached in and pulled out an old and clean, thankfully, jockstrap. Izuku pulled the cloth taunt between his hands as he sneaked up behind the big man. Well, as my counterpart DeadPool would say, this shit's gonna have nuts in it. Then Izuku lunged forward and wrapped the joke strap around the man's neck and started to strangle him with it. The sudden attempt on his life made him panic, and that left his quirk useless. It took a matter of seconds for Izuku to crush the man's windpipe and leaving struggling to breathe on the ground. Everyone who'd been watching the fight flew into a panic and tried to flee. I am so glad I was prepared for this. In case you're wondering, before I got here, I saw a nice family watching Home Alone. The people furthest from the fight were the first ones to make it to the doors. They threw them open and ran out without watching where they were going. Izuku's ears were treated to a sympathy of people screaming in pain. He'd lain boards with nails sticking straight up in the air in front of each door. People were tripping over each other and landing on the nails, impaling themselves in the face and chest. Looks like I nailed it," Izuku called out in a sing-song voice. Everyone who was still trapped in the room with him looked at the psychotic boy in panic. He pulled out his remaining katana and skipped over gleefully to the crowds at the door. The people stampeded over each other to get out the door, and those who fell were trampled underfoot. Izuku stopped skipping and started sprinting towards the door in an effort to kill as many people as he could before they got away. His sword cut down anyone who got within reach as it joyfully carved flesh from bone. Izuku grinned manically as he swung his katana and watched the arcs of red it left in its wake. Izuku sat in the middle of the wrestling mat, and more than 30 corpses lined the floor. Crimson lined the floor except for the mat and a small corner where both of the women who had been fighting were huddled up, trying to escape Izuku's notice. Izuku glanced over at the corner, and then swung his still crimson blade through the air, stopping it suddenly. All the blood that had covered the blade was jerked free and splattered to the walls and floor. He sheathed the katana as he slowly trotted over to the pair. They pressed themselves harder against the wall to try to escape Izuku. "It's all right, I'm not gonna hurt you." Izuku was trying to calm them down as he got closer. They didn't seem to hear him. "I used to suffer because of those shit sticks too." Now they heard him because as soon as he finished talking they froze. "Why, you did?" the woman closest to him asked. "Yeah, their boss took one of my friends from me, so I'm going to get her back. Now can you come out so I can get those collars off?" Izuku stopped a few feet away from them as a way to put them at ease, even just a little. They stood up, and he cut the collars off their necks without leaving so much as scratch on them. "There you go, now you should get out of here before anyone else shows up." Without any more prompting, the two of them ran over the trampled bodies covering the nails and out into the night. "Now on to the next fight, ladies and gents." Before Izuku left, he made sure to take the money off each of the bodies. Shit, this going to take forever to clean all the blood off. It had been 2 weeks since Izuku's attack on the Fight Club. He'd hit 2 other bases that dealt with drug distribution, and he'd gotten enough for a new set of gear. He'd also made quite a name for himself as a vigilante. His new suit was a dark green. I thought, hey, Deadpool took red, and I need my own Christmas Day suit. And everyone always said green was my color. It was still made out of Kevlar and spandex, but it had black armor shoulder pads as well as black combat shin guards. He had his 2 katanas strapped to his back. His combat knives covered his body, and he had 2 sidearm 45 cal pistols with 6 bullet mags each. On his chest was a black dragon decoration that had its fangs bared in a snarl. That was the most original part of my suit. Hey, if someone makes some art of me, let me know in the comments so I can see what I look like. QAce, right now I look like words on a screen. His mask was also a dark green with black patches over his eyes, but a white see-through cloth was spread over the openings for his eyes. This way no one can see any part of my sexy body. I need the people I'm fighting to be scared of me, not turned on. Izuku then left his rundown abandoned house and headed for the docks. I feel a heavy helping of plot convenience coming. The base at the docks was more of a checkpoint for Francis's weapons, victims, and drugs from other countries. Izuku glanced over at the ship that had just pulled into port, and written on the side was the US France. And there it is, plot convenience, and it was lazy writing. He turns back to the main building in front of the ship. He opened the door quietly and slipped inside. 5 men were sitting at a card table, 4 were playing, 1 was dealing. Izuku snuck closer so he could hear what they were saying. Hey, did you guys hear about what happened to the other hideouts? The dealer asked. Yeah, poor bastards, the man to his left said. But we're ready for anyone who tries to attack this place. I'd like to see anybody try to get past us, the man to the right of the dealer said calmly. Izuku smiled to himself as he moved out into the open, but they still hadn't noticed him. Well, let's make a bet on that, shall we? All five jumped to their feet looking for the owner of the sudden voice they'd heard. Their eyes landed on Izuku, who had one of his guns pointed at them. Then before they could react, Izuku pulled the trigger, and the man to the right of the dealer fell to the ground with a bullet lodged between his eyes. The other players sprung into action, trying to take cover behind some of the crates around the room. In his rush to hide, the dealer tripped over his chair and fell to the ground. Izuku walked over to him and put a bullet in the back of his skull without even looking at him. He began to search the room looking for the three that hit. Shit, I didn't mean for them to turn this into such a hassle. I need to find them and get out of here, Biff. The sound of metal scraping metal filled the air, as well as a large bang that ripped Izuku from his thoughts. Have fear, villains. Why? Because I am here. All Might punched a hole right through the side of the building and was currently standing in the hole he'd created with his arms crossed and a triumphant smile on his face. Shit. Izuku was pissed that All Might showed up, and then he noticed the reporters that were behind him with cameras aimed inside. Great, he brought the media with him. Fuck me. Izuku tried desperately to come up with a plan, but when he wasn't focused, he unconsciously started to be a motor mouth. What the hell is wrong with you? What? All Might was taken aback by Izuku's question. There was a door maybe 20 feet to the right. Yet you bashed your way through a wall. All Might was flustered, and the reporters were recording all of it. Are you telling me that the number one hero is too lazy to act like a normal person and use a door? Or do you just enjoy causing property damage? 'Cause that doesn't sound very hero-like to me. Izuku started to realize what he was saying and began to panic. Shit, what happens when I piss him off? Fuck it, I'm in this deep. Oh, innuendos, yay. I don't enjoy causing property damage, I just need to be careful if the door was trapped. All Might was trying to save himself before the reporters ran his name through the mud. Hey, do you think a flimsy excuse like that'll hold up in court? Izuku was now trying to look for a way to get out of this mess. What? All Might asked indignantly. Then he decided to change the subject before his reputation took a bigger hit than it already had. You're the vigilante that attacked a few drug bases and a fighting ring, right? Izuku nodded, which looked a little weird in his green mask. Yeah, the name's DeadPool. How can I help you? He decided to top it all off with a mock bow. I'm going to have to place you under arrest. I'm sorry, kid, but what you're doing is wrong. All Might started to walk towards Izuku, ready for a fight. Izuku was still standing there seemingly calm. You know, I've always wanted to ask you, what do you use? All Might stopped dead in his tracks. I'm sorry. You know, what kind of steroids do you use? All Might was completely stunned and just stood there, while Izuku continued. 'Cause I've seen a lot of strength-enhancing quirks, but none of them make the user look like an old pro bodybuilder. All those guys use steroids to get that look, so I wanted to know what you use to do the same. All Might was now thoroughly pissed off, and the reporters were giddy with all the footage they were getting. All Might rushed forward and backhanded Izuku while saying, Do you ever shut up? Now the reporters were squealing at the display of All Might losing his temper. Izuku, however, flew from the force of the slap. He sailed right through the metal wall and about 18 more feet into a shipping crate. Oh god, I think he broke everything. Izuku slowly pulled himself out of the crate as his bones healed. He looked back through the hole his body had made in the metal wall and saw that the goons that he'd been hunting had attacked All Might in a panic after he smacked Izuku. Good, they're giving me a distraction so I can get on board. He turned to the ship, just in time to see them kick away the ramp and throw most of the ropes off. They were leaving and Izuku needed to catch up. He took off towards the dock and launched himself at the ship. His hand caught on to a rope that was left over the side from when they hastily set sail. Izuku was holding on for dear life, and his homeland became a speck in the distance. He climbed up onto the main deck and quickly went down and hid himself in the cargo hold. All Might had finished fighting the three inside the building and walked out to find Deadpool. He walked through the hole he'd created when he slapped the boy and saw a destroyed crate a ways away. Shit, I didn't mean to hit him that hard. He walked over to the crate to pull Deadpool out, but to his surprise and dismay the boy was already gone. He quickly looked around for where he could have ran off to. But then he noticed that the ship that had been here earlier was gone. Oh shit. Izuku had to search the cargo hold for a good hiding spot. He ended up finding a crate with a loose board on the back panel. He pulled the board out of place and ripped it off the crate. He peered into the box in hopes of glimpsing its contents. A light flickered and Izuku got a good look inside, and he was ecstatic. Inside the crate were stacks of C4 with remote-timed detonators, remote-controlled time bombs. He began carefully extracting the crate's contents until he'd emptied the box. He began to sneak around the ship, hiding the bombs wherever he could. He'd hidden 3 bombs in the barracks. He hid one under a bed, another in the hanging light, and the final one he hid in the back of their first aid kit. He hid one in the captain's cabin under the bed. He hid 5 in the engine room and more throughout the ship. Then he took the master switch and sat in his now empty crate, and he waited. All Might felt sick to his stomach as he marched over to the police cars with the 3 unconscious thugs over his shoulder. He tossed the 3 goons into a nearby police car and barely had time to turn around before the press mobbed him. All Might. All Might. A microphone was shoved into the hero's face. Where is the vigilante that you fought with earlier? Then another microphone pushed the first one out of the way. What do you have to say about losing your temper with that young boy and attacking him so violently? Question after question were thrown into All Might's face before he could answer the last one. It was honestly overwhelming. All Might ended up raising his hand to get the reporters to go quiet. That boy was the vigilante known as Deadpool. He's extremely dangerous and is responsible for more than a few deaths. He's not to be taken lightly, and he has some sort of healing or regeneration quirk. The reporters who had been silent burst into another frenzy of questions, but All Might jumped away. He left a cloud of dust in his wake that caused the news crews to start coughing. 2 other pro heroes were having a difficult time with the girl they were taking care of. Eraserhead had decided to watch the news, and All Might's latest exploit was on. That was one of the biggest mistakes he'd made today. Midnight brought Emma into the room as All Might began to speak. That boy was the vigilante known as Deadpool. He's extremely dangerous and is responsible for more than a few deaths. He's not to be taken lightly, and he has some sort of healing or regeneration quirk. Emma seemed to have stopped listening after the name Deadpool. That's Izuku, that's him. The 2 pros looked at each other confused. The Deadpool was the game Ajax made us fight in. It's where Izuku protected me, since we were forced to kill each other. Midnight felt like her heart was going to break. Do you know how many times they made you participate in the Deadpool? Emma finished without hesitation. No. But Izuku said he went in over 120 times. Eraserhead choked on his coffee. He what? Emma, not understanding why he was so stunned, repeated herself. He said he fought in the Deadpool over 120 times. Both heroes were mortified by what these kids had to go through. Midnight tried to console Emma, even though she didn't need it. It's okay, sweetie, you don't have to go back to that horrible place ever. She hugged the young girl while Eraserhead started to pet her head again. Emma looked up at them. What's wrong? I was never in danger. I had Izuku to protect me. Both of you still could have gotten seriously hurt. Midnight said as she pulled Emma into a protective hug. Emma looked at the 2 of them with puppy eyes. So can we get Izuku back, please? About that, Nezu said that we're to let Izuku continue to go after the people who held you guys prisoner. Eraserhead said, trying to keep Emma calm. Emma started to tear up, and her lip began to quiver. Midnight looked at Eraserhead. Oh boy, here we go, Shota. The ship arrived in Europe. But it took weeks to get there, even with all the people on board who had water-related quirks that were trying to speed things up. They arrived in between France and Spain at about 3 in the morning. Izuku carefully extracted himself from his hiding place. He quietly creeped up from the cargo hold and past the sleeping crew members. They weren't his targets, their captain was. Izuku silently opened the door to the captain's quarters and locked it behind him. He stalked over to the sleeping form of the captain in his bed. The captain, who was known as Captain Ray, was a calm and reasonable man. His quirk ironically changed his head into that of a stingray, and when he is in salt water, his arms turn into their fins. Izuku quickly clamped his hand over the man's mouth, both waking him and keeping him quiet. The HHH, now listen up. You're going to answer my questions, or... Izuku drew one of his knives, and Ray's eyes instantly snapped onto it. He quickly nodded, understanding the danger he was in. Good. He removed his hand from Ray's mouth. Now, where can I find your boss, Francis? Ray figured he was talking about Ajax, since his name sounded the most made up. He's in America now. He was afraid to give his assailant the answer, but he hoped it would spare the lives of him and his crew. Fuck. Izuku was understandably upset. Then his voice took on a calm and deadly tone. When did he go there? Gulp asterisk, about a week ago. I brought him here myself. Ray was praying that the man armed like a one-man army would leave soon and spare them. So that shit stick wasn't lying to me. Izuku's tone became less deadly. Great, where can I find some transportation to get me to Francis? Ray took a moment to think his answer through before he spoke. There's a warehouse that Ajax owns that has a runway built inside he uses in emergencies. There's a guy there with an eagle's head. He's a coward, and he'll take you wherever you want if you threaten him. He then pointed to a map on his desk that Izuku quickly grabbed. I have it marked on that. Thanks. I'm leaving, and you don't have to worry, I won't wild a bald against you or you men before I go. Then he walked out the door and closed it behind him. Ray breathed a sigh of relief when he was gone. The second the door was shut behind him, Izuku pulled out a small black device that had one red button on the top of it. He then hurried off the ship. He barely made it out of the port before an explosion lit up the morning sky. Shit, I wanted to be further away than this. Izuku walked off, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. Izuku made it to the warehouse at 5:37 am, and he was irritated that it took so long. I went down 4 wrong streets and had to take a detour for construction. God, I miss Japan. He walked in the door like he owned the place. I was in no mood to do that Metal Gear stealth shit. He walked straight to the barracks and threw the door open. The bang that sounded sent the 4 occupants out of bed and standing at attention. By the time they realized the person who woke them up isn't their drill sergeant. Izuku had picked out the man with an eagle's head and drawn his now silenced pistol. 3 of the 4 men fell to the ground with a new lead addition to their brains. The last one dropped to the ground in hopes of not being shot in the face. Please don't kill me. I won't if you do as I tell you. The man in the green suit said coldly. He looked up, and the snarling dragon on the man's chest sent shivers down his spine. Why, yay, anything you want. Jay, just don't hurt me. Great. Now take me to your boss in America. Izuku's tone was cold and demanding. The man started to shake horribly and was crying. I don't know where he is. I don't even know where the American bases are. It was a security measure. He continued to blubber and sob, until Izuku smacked him upside the head. That's fine, just get me to America. The man nodded, and they headed to the nearest plane in the hangar. Nezu didn't know what to be more annoyed by today. He had a few options. First, Emma barged into his office dragging Midnight and Eraserhead behind her, and demanded that she see Izuku. She still hadn't left, and was still chanting at him. Call him. Call him. Call him. Next, Nezu learned Izuku's full name and he'd found out that his parents had abandoned him for being quirkless. He'd recently learned that they were having another kid, most likely trying to replace their firstborn. The cruelty of humans really pissed Nezu off. Finally, All Might, who had missed the meeting, was trying to hunt down Izuku, which was the exact opposite of what Nezu wanted. He'd tried to get a hold of the #1 hero, but he was out searching for DeadPool. Yup, Nezu was beginning to think he might need something stronger than tea to get through today. The plane ride had been annoyingly long to Izuku, who didn't like to sit still for long. They were stuck in a cramped cabin for hours, since Izuku refused to let the plane go off course. They could see the east coast now, and Izuku was excited. Izuku pulled out one of his sidearms and loaded a round into the chamber. He then lazily pointed it over and shot his still blubbering pilot in the side of the head. He grabbed the throttle and aimed the plane to crash in the water. You know, I always want to be a captain, so refer to me as Captain America, because I'm gonna put her in the water. Shit, where's my shield? Izuku's ramblings were cut short when the nose of the plane slammed into the water. The bird compressed like when someone steps on a pop can. Izuku slammed face first through the windshield and broke everything in his face. It took him more than 30 minutes to drag himself from the wreckage and onto dry land. Shit, I didn't think that one through at all. He crawled onto the beach. Well, even though it was a short chapter, it looks like the European part of my vacation is over. Izuku pulled himself onto the shores of New York. Shit, that's lazy. Couldn't you come up with a more original place, like Maryland, Gotham, or Dubstep Land? God, I love dubstep. He crawled off the docks he pulled himself onto and headed to the slums. He was stumbling along looking for information brokers. He tripped when he was walking through an especially shady area and looked up to see a sign by a door in a solid concrete wall. It reads Sister Margaret's Home for Wayward Girls and Bar. Fuck yeah, straight out of the movies. Izuku decided to try his luck finding a broker inside the shithole in front of him. He pushed the heavy metal door open and walked in. A man standing behind the bar eyed him carefully. It's not every day someone walks in what looks like a hero outfit, but is armed to the teeth. The bartender had pure white hair and his eyes were a clear light blue. He seemed to be in his late 30s or early 40s. He stood around 5'10". The glass in his hand had frost spreading across its surface. Hey, what are you here for? Suspicion was heavy in his voice. I'm looking for someone to give me some information on a certain criminal. Like where I can kill him, Izuku said coldly. The man smiled. You'll fit right in, kid. He then downed the contents of his glass and set it upside down on the bar counter. You know that the brokers don't sell for cheap, right? I figured. Izuku took another look around the bar and realized it was full of bulky guys that were slightly less armed than him. Looks like you're running a mercenary gig. Mind if I take a few jobs to pay the brokers? Izuku asked, amusement clear in his tone. A bulky guy clapped his hand on Izuku's shoulder. What makes you think a scrawny kid like you would be any better than a meat shield? Izuku grabbed the hand on his shoulder and kicked the man's legs out from under him. The second he hit the floor, Izuku pressed his foot down on his throat and had drawn one of his katanas, with the blade pointed between the man's eyes. He still had a hold of the man's arm and propped it in the air so he could dislocate it at any moment. I fought in the DeadPool for 5 years. I had 146 kills to my name, 146. After I got out, I started to go after the guy who put me in there and took my friend. Now I've got 198 kills, 198. So I think I can pull off a simple job. During Izuku's rant, his voice started to sound unhinged, and everyone started to back away. Then the man on the floor spoke. I know you. You're that guy who went around killing crime bosses in Japan. How did you learn to speak English? Izuku looked down at the man on the floor, surprised that he wasn't pissing himself, let alone speaking calmly. The person who held me captive was trying to sell people like me, and didn't want me to embarrass him in front of the American buyers. I'm not flawless, but it's getting there. The man laughed. I like this kid. Hey, I'll help you learn to speak English better if you hang around. It's getting boring around here when no one'll fight me. He chortled. Name's Buck, by the way. My quirk dampens the pain I feel. I go by DeadPool. Izuku replied, helping Buck to his feet. I'll take you up on that offer. Technically, I'm quirkless, but I heal from any and everything. It also boosts my strength and reflexes slightly. That makes me a great shot with guns and other things. You all were warned about the jokes. Izuku looked back to the bartender. And you are? Jack Frost. Jack replied, cold as ice. Izuku froze on the spot and slowly turned his head towards Jack. You wouldn't happen to know a girl named Emma Frost, would you? The room suddenly dropped 20 degrees in temperature. How do you know my daughter? Jack said slowly. The white eye slits in Izuku's mask narrowed at Jack. She was thrown into the DeadPool with me, and I protected her. Izuku answered with a dangerous edge in his voice. The chill that had infected the room disappeared as quickly as it came. Jack practically sprinted around the bar and lifted Izuku off the floor in a bone-crushing hug. Thank you for protecting my baby girl. I almost lost it when I found out my wife had sold her off. Jack was crying, but as his tears would leave his eyes, they'd freeze and fall to the ground. Why'd your wife sell your daughter away? Izuku asked, still suspicious. Jack set Izuku down and looked at him sadly. She was a firm believer in the quirk hierarchy. He said slowly. Oh right, the hierarchy goes like this for those that don't know. People believe that emitter-type quirks are the best, and anyone who has an emitter quirk is a superior race. Then there's transformation quirks who are like the middle-class citizens. Next, there are mutation quirks who are seen as monsters and weaklings. Finally, there are the quirkless who are seen as garbage, not even worth the air they breathe. Quirkless people are the victims of hate crimes all the time, but the police and heroes don't even bother to look into it anymore. My wife was a transformation quirk user. Jack continued. She hated that she was middle class and wanted more. I didn't know it at the time, but she only married me since my quirk's an emitter type. When she found out our daughter had a mutation quirk, she was disgusted. I didn't care any way or another. She was my kid, and that was all that mattered. My wife saw it differently. She blamed me for our daughter's quirk, saying things like, you're not a real emitter type, you're just a fruit. She wasn't any kinder to our baby. I tried to earn enough money so I could leave her and support my duetter. But I had to leave for a business trip to get the raise I needed, and when I got back my girl was gone. My wife was proud of herself, saying she'd cleaned the filth from our lives, but I was devastated. Jack paced sobbing, but carried on. She kept trying to make me forget by telling me she hadn't mattered, and that we were better off without her. One day I snapped. I flash froze the blood in her body, and my wife crumbled before my very eyes. I haven't looked back on it till now, and I won't stop looking for my little girl. Jack looked up, tears streaming down his face like frozen rivers now. Now you show up saying you know her and cared for her. Please tell me, where is my baby? Izuku looked Jack dead in the eyes, and for the first time since he was taken by Francis, he felt his heart wrench in his chest. I don't know. I'm going after the guys who took her to get her back. I promised her I'd keep her safe, and I intend to keep that promise. Jack nodded slowly. You're welcome here anytime, kid, and I'll do anything I can to help. Then Buck put his hand on Jack's shoulder. You've always been a good friend to me, Jack. I'll help get your kid back however I can. Izuku nodded. Great, but we're going to need some money for weapons and a base in Japan. Jack glanced at the green-suited merc with the mouth. Why would we need a base in Japan? Because we already have this place, and I feel like Dante will get lazy and send me back there. So I want to be comfortable. Everyone in the bar gave a worried glance to the unstable boy. They weren't quite sure what he was talking about. A week passed and Izuku's birthday went by. He turned 11 yesterday, but he didn't feel like celebrating. He'd taken a job with Buck this time around. They had to rough up some guy who'd been going shop to shop collecting protection money, so he and his gang would fuck off. They saw their guy sitting on his Harley Davidson. Izuku smirked to himself and turned to Buck. "I want that bike." Buck smirked back at Izuku, just as Izuku pulled his mask over his face. "Let's go get it and get they's job done then, little buddy." They walked up to the man on his bike, who glanced at them nervously. Hey, whatever you guys think you're trying to pull, my guys'll make you regret it," he whimpered out. Izuku didn't wait for him to say anything else. He reached out and grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the bike and into the air. "Listen, my friends are a lot more understanding than me, so I'll say this for them. You and your friends get out of here. Got it?" The man was nodding so fast, he looked like a bobblehead. "Yeah, no problem." "Good, then we're done." "Wait, we are?" "Yeah, but I'm taking the bike," Izuku said smugly. "Motherfucker." The man tried to draw his gun from his waistband, but Izuku had already drawn his sword and cut off his hand. The man was clutching the bleeding stump, crying out in pain, but everyone was trying to run and wait for the heroes to step in. Izuku pulled a lighter out of his pocket and pulled it apart. He had the striker in one hand and the container with the lighter fluid in the other. Buck was silently praying Izuku didn't take things too far. Izuku then tossed the fluid onto the bleeding stump and threw a spark at it. The bleeding stopped as the limb burst into flames. Izuku then grabbed the man, who was now screaming louder, and dragged him to a nearby fountain and dumped the stump in the water. He cauterized the wound, Buck realized. Izuku then tossed the man, who was on the verge of shock, to the side of the road. "Now tell your buddies to get the fuck off our turf." Then Izuku went through his pockets and grabbed his keys. He went back to Harley and glanced back at Buck. "Hey, I'll see you back at Sister Margaret's." Buck nodded and started to head back to his truck. "See you there, DeadPool." Izuku and Buck pushed the door back open and walked into the bar. Buck slapped a gold card onto the bar counter. "Give DeadPool here the money. It was his first job, and he didn't need me there at all." Izuku looked over at Buck, slightly shocked. "Hey, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. Consider it a present for a good first job. So how'd you like learning to ride a motorcycle?" Jack slapped a stack of cash in front of Izuku and started to laugh. "I'd have paid to see you try to ride a motorcycle." "Fuck you guys. With my powers it was easier, so I only fucked up twice," Izuku said indignantly, still sniggering. "It's okay, kid. Just remembered we get enough money to get your fear, and we get my daughter back." "Hey, who said anything about waiting till I had more money? I'm still looking for her even now." "Thanks, kid." Jack smiled as he tossed Izuku a cold beer. "I don't want to hear anything about me being underage. I go around killing people for a living. Drinking early isn't worse, no matter what you say." Izuku was walking up on another one of Francis's storehouses. He had no idea what was in this one, but he hoped it was important. He left his bike parked on a meter, so he did have to hurry. He tried the front warehouse door, but it's locked. "Fan-fucking-tastic, you all enjoying this?" He looked up and saw an open window on the second floor. "Now how do I get up there?" Izuku ended up with two of his knives shoved into the wall of the warehouse. He was climbing by stabbing his knives into the wall to create handholds, and then moving them up to the window. "Shit, I'm an idiot. This a bad idea. If I fall, this'll hurt so much." It took Izuku almost 5 minutes to get the hang of climbing and make it to the window. "Before you judge me, I am slightly crazy. I mean, if you've read the DeadPool comics, you'd know. We're schizophrenics, suffer from bipolar depression, ADHD, narcissism, and whatever the fuck. Lets me see you guys. As you can guess, we're a mess. Now that the excuses are out of the way, fuck you." Izuku slid in through the open window. and face planted onto a catwalk. Oh shit. Izuku peeled himself off the ground and took a look around. He started to grin like a maniac as he saw what lay before him. Grunts were moving throughout the warehouse with forklifts carrying crates of cash. Each crate was about 1 cubic meter in volume, and everyone was full of green Benjamins. All eyes suddenly turned to Izuku as his song filled the building. Oh, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Everywhere you go. Take a look in the 5 and 10 glistening once again, with candy canes and silver lanes aglow. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Toys in every store. But the prettiest sight to see is the holly that will be on your own front door, Tilda. As Izuku finished the last line of his song, he jumped from his perch and landed on a grunt which slammed his he into the ground with a sickening crunch. Ooh, look at all these children on my naughty list. Then their men charged Izuku with their quirks activated. Hey, what's up with Francis mostly hiring dudes? Is he sexist, that pig? The first guy grunted in annoyance at Izuku's ramblings. He charged, swinging the blades on his arms at Izuku's face. The blades ran from his wrist to his elbow in a triangle shape and protrude about 8 inches from the arm max. Izuku stepped back to avoid getting his face cut up, and then turned the man into a shish kebab with hiwa katanas. Ooh, those will make a great hood ornament for my bike. The remaining 2 charged Izuku, while the other 5 or 6 workers tried to hide since they had non-combat-oriented quirks. Jesus, they should have had more than 3 people guarding all this cash. The first one's hands morphed into claws as he lunged forward. He was too closed for Izuku to dodge as he raked his claws across the dragon on Izuku's suit. Seconds later, he screamed in agony as his claws weren't strong enough to pierce through the Kevlar, and they shattered. The second man stepped forward, the muscles in his arms bulging, as he took the first man's place. He drew back his fist and swung for Izuku's face. Izuku quickly raised his katana with the blade facing the oncoming fist. The grunt couldn't stop his fist in time, and the force of his punch split his fist on the blade, but it continued to split halfway up his arm. He tried to pull his now useless limb back as it sprayed blood everywhere. But before he could get away, Izuku rushed forward and slashed his blade across his throat. The goon fell to his knees as his good hand snapped to his throat to stop the bleeding. As his vision started to darken, he gazed into Izuku's glaring mask. You bastard, do you have any idea how long it will take to get all you blood out of my suit? Then Izuku drew one of his guns and offed the man who was still crying over his claws. Oh, there were 6 of you, huh? Izuku said as he turned back to the group, trying to escape his sight. A woman shakily stood up and moved forward. Why are you doing this? Why? You're a part of an organization that kidnaps and kills people, and you didn't think someone would be pissed off. Izuku then rapidly pulled his gun's trigger, and the 5 people behind the woman fell, with their brains splattered across the wall behind them. The woman shakily turns to see her colleagues lying in pools of their own blood that's slowly expanding towards her. Please stop. Tell me where your fucking boss is, came Izuku's cold reply. I can't. They'll kill me if I do. And I'll kill you if you don't, so where does that leave us? With tears in her eyes, she pointed at an office almost out of sight, in the back of the warehouse. There's a map in there with some addresses circled. We were never told what was there. Now you'll let me go, right? You said they were going to kill you, right? She looked at Izuku in panic. At least this'll be painless. Izuku quickly drew his second pistol and shot her between the eyes. Then he holstered both of his guns and got out his phone. After typing in the number and a few rings, Jack picked up. Hey Jack. How quickly could you get a semi over to me? Jack was a little confused by the request. We keep 1:30 minutes from here. Why? That's convenient. I got a lot of cash here. I want to get out so we can speed up our attack on Francis. I'll have Buck bring it over as fast as possible. After Buck arrived, it took 10 hours to transport all the crates of cash out of Francis's warehouse. Izuku is currently sitting on one of the crates talking to Jack and Buck. Hell of a haul, kid. Yet it is. Izuku hopped off the box he was on and pushed it to Buck. Here for helping me move all this. Anytime, kid. Thanks. Buck said as he struggled to move it towards his truck. Here, Jack, for you. Izuku was pushing another box towards him. Okay, before I'm accused of being cheap, buying a house, weapons, and transportation isn't cheap. Besides, the guys said they'd help for free, so me paying them wasn't even part of the deal. Nah. DeadPool considerate payment to find my daughter, and we're good. Izuku nodded. I didn't have tears in my eyes. Shut up. You got it, Jack. I won't let either of you down. Unfortunately, Jack and I spent the next 5 years hunting Francis down. We'll skip that time since I wasn't happy about how long it was taking, and that put me in a low place. After those 5 years, Izuku was sitting in Sister Margaret's at the bar downing a beer. He's 16 now, and he's grown to about 6'5" inches, just a little shorter than Buck, but taller than most in Japan. His muscles were more defined, and he'd added a titanium weave in his armor to make it more bullet-resistant and show off his muscles better. Jack sat across the bar with a can of beer in his hands, just as tired as Izuku. Suddenly, the phone went off, and Jack picked it up. After listening for a few seconds, he handed it to Izuku. For you sounds really official. Izuku snatched the receiver from Jack's hand and put it to his ear. The first thing he heard was a squeaky voice on the other line. DeadPool, right? You were right, it was hard to get a hold of you, but your presence isn't hard to miss. It was only a matter of time before I found you. Izuku smirked as he recognized the voice and pulled his mask back over his face. Nezu, how are you? What can I do for you? I'm doing well. But one of my classes was attacked recently, and I'd like to call in a favor. I want you to come back and help defend my students in all my first-year classes. Also, we had word your old friend Ajax and Kilbrew snuck back here without you noticing. I want to make good on my promise to help you get them. Izuku was now grinning ear to ear. I'll be there as soon as I can. Then he hung up and glanced to Jack. We're heading to Japan, so let's get Buck and get going. What? Don't worry, it's because Francis is there. And besides, I bought a bar over there, so you'd feel right at home. Now let's get going. Izuku didn't give him any more time to reply, and walked out of the bar. Francis, when I find you, you're going to regret being born, Izuku promised to himself. Katsuki hated to get up early, but he needed to today since Yua was having all first-year hero students meet with the principal with their parents. His morning hadn't been a pleasant one so far. Flashback. Katsuki was sleeping peacefully with 3 fans aimed at him, to reduce the chance of blowing up his bed. Then his door flew open with a loud bang that shook the house. His mom stepped in to wake him, more than she already had. Get up, brat, we need to go to your school, so they can tell us what you did wrong. She talked so softly to wake him up. Katsuki jumped out of bed when she screamed at him. What the hell is wrong with you? You old hag. The two glared at each other until Mitsuki broke the silence. Get downstairs, or we will have problems. Then she turned and slammed the door behind her. Katsuki felt a shiver go down his spine as she left. Flashback end. Damn old hag bossing me around. When I'm the #1 hero, she won't be able to tell me what to do. Katsuki grumbled to himself. He was switching from his sleeping clothes to his messy school uniform. His shirt was untucked like usual. He stomped down the stairs only to draw his mother's anger. Stop stomping through my house, you brat. Shut up, you hag. Bakugo continued to stomp over to his parents at the front door. Mitsuki slapped the back of his head, causing him to look at the floor for a second. His head snapped back up, and he met his mother's glare with one of his own. Bakugo's dad ushered the two towards the door. Come on, you two, we can't be late to meet up with the Midoriyas. His voice was soft and calming as he gently pushed his family along. The Bakugo family made it to the train station at the same time as the Midoriyas. Katsuki saw his auntie Inko first, followed closely by her husband Hisashi Midoriya, and finally Izumi Midoriya trailed behind them. She was young, but she was just as smart as Deku, so she skipped into their grade. Deku would never have been allowed to skip grades since they wouldn't let him be any better than a quirked person. While he respected Inko's decision to get rid of that useless loser, it really pissed Katsuki off that Izumi was in the same grade as him. Damn it. I'm glad Deku's gone. But does she think she's better than me since she's so smart? I'll teach everyone that I'm the best there ever was. While Katsuki understood why the Midoriya family sold off Izuku, his parents were appalled by it. While they'd gotten to the point where they could speak to the family again, they'd never been able to fully forgive them. They'd found it worse when they treated Izuku like he'd never existed and refused to even tell Izumi she'd had a brother. Izumi ran over and sat next to the angry boy while their parents had a strained conversation. Hey, Katsuki. Katsuki ignored her and tried to sleep. Izumi pretended not to notice and continued to talk to him about their upcoming day. The group arrived at US campus, and their sensei Aizawa was waiting at the gate, still covered in bandages. Izumi will be replacing Izuku in 1A. Aizawa was handing out passes for UA to each of the parents. He already had 4 out when he saw them coming. He handed them to each of the families and waved them through the gate. They had barely gone through the gate and Katsuki had already seen 2 of his classmates. Hey, round face, raccoon eyes, do you know what we're doing here? Both of said students' parents turned and glared at the boy, but the girls were more startled by the sudden yelling. Then out of nowhere Katsuki received a painful smack to the back of his head. You brat, you don't talk to women like that. Katsuki turned to glare at his mother, while Izumi ran over to her other friends. Then Kirishima walked in with his parents. Yo Bakubro, how are you? His parents were lagging behind him as he ran to his buddy. Katsuki looked over at him uninterested. What do you want? Katsuki received another painful smack as Aizawa walked over to the families. All right, everyone else is in the classroom, so we'll head there and get them. He then led them to Wana to get the rest of the class. Mina leaned over to Uraraka and Izumi as they walked. It's kinda weird that Sensei can even see through that, when he looks like a mummy. The 2 girls giggled as Aizawa turned around and glared at them. I can still hear you 3. And the girls gulped nervously. When the group arrived at 1A's huge door, Mr. Uraraka looked around. Wow, I wish we could have helped build all this. Aizawa ignored him and threw the door open and yelled into the room. Come on, we have to be at the principal's office in 5 minutes. Ida and his family were the first ones to the door, much to everyone's amusement. Everyone walked through the halls talking quietly as they went. The parents talked about their students with one another, while the kids talked about new heroes and upcoming tests. They all made their way to the office, and outside of it Nezu stood on All Might's shoulder. Next to them was Aizawa's teaching assistant and current charge Emma Frost. She smiled at the class and waved when they approached. Next to them was Class 1B. Monoma was laughing at them as they approached. Looks like Wana wouldn't be any good in a rescue situation. You'd be late. Nezu glanced over at the students slightly miffed. They are right on time, but 1B was here early and hasn't done anything, so how does that help? Monoma stopped laughing and hid among his peers. Bakugo laughed at the other boy's obvious retreat. Nezu then turned to the parents of 1A and 1B. All right then, I bet you're wondering why I called all of you here. Everyone nodded in agreement. Well, as you're all aware, Wana was attacked at the USJ a week ago. Due to that, we've asked someone to come and help protect our first-year classes from now on. Baru Asui was the next one to speak out. Is All Might incapable of protecting our children? No, it's not that. But All Might is one man and people make mistakes. With another person, we can be more sure of your children's safety. Now, if there aren't any more questions, we can meet him. I'll ask you to be quiet when talking to him since he flew in last night and is suffering from jet lag." Then Nezu leaned down from his perch on All Might's shoulder and opened his office's door. Everyone stepped inside one at a time, and they were blown away by how big Nezu's office is. Even though all the lights were off, there was enough light from the windows to see most of the huge room. Then gradually everyone's attention turned to the man curled up with a blanket on the couch. "All right, you need to get up now," Nezu told the sleepy man, who slowly sat up. "Come on, Nezu, just a few more minutes to get the lag out of my system," he saw groggily. All Might stiffened at the familiar voice. Nezu responded by flipping on the lights. "Ah, what the hell?" Once the lights were on, everyone got a good look at U.S. new student guardian. He was sitting in his green suit that seemed to be made out of Kevlar and spandex. He was still armed to the teeth and had his swords on his back. A black dragon design was on his chest. His mask hid all of his features, but left white eye slots that seemed to move with his eyes. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet U.S. newest helper, DeadPool," Nezu introduced Merc. All Might groaned. "Nezu, please tell me you didn't." "Oh, but I did. We need the help of someone dangerous like him who the villains will fear." The parents looked like they wanted to argue, but it would be hard to find a hole in the logic of the world's smartest animal. "Yo, what's up, anger issues?" DeadPool chimed in happily as he stared at All Might. Emma tried to run to the boy as soon as she saw him. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder holding her back. Aizawa whispered to her. "Not yet, just wait a little longer." Emma nodded reluctantly. "So how's the media treating you, Mr. Failed Drug Test?" Izuku was still talking in a sing-aong voice. All Might glared at him while taking Nezu off his shoulder and setting him on his desk. "I should be putting you under arrest, DeadPool." "Oh, a bit you can't since you need my help." Then he stood up, letting everyone see that he couldn't have been too much older than the students. "Uo. So are these the kiddies I'm babysitting?" Izuku asked as he moved over to inspect the classes. Then a blur of white hair broke away from Aizawa and jumped onto Izuku. Everyone held their breath, since it looked like Class 1A's teaching assistant just tackled the heavily armed vigilante. Izuku looked down at his assailant and saw 2 white cat ears in an ocean of snow-white hair. His voice broke as he hoped against hope it was her. Emma," she nodded into his chest and hugged him tighter. Izuku hugged her back until he moved her to arm's length to get a look at her. She smiled at him when their eyes met. She'd changed quite a bit. Her figure was more mature now. Her body was sleek and toned. "So she's a little flat, but has a nice ass." Her face had changed from the pudgy cute kitten-like face he'd known before to one that was a bombshell. The smile she gave him almost took his breath away. "Yeah, it's hard to hide certain things in skin-tight armor." Izuku couldn't help but grin at her under his mask as he felt the weight of fear for her safety lift off his chest. Then Nezu found himself suspended in the air by the front of his suit, which was stuck firmly in Izuku's hand. "Nezu, you're a smart guy. I'm sure Emma probably mentioned me to you, so when I told you I was going to go search for my friend, why didn't you tell me she was with you during those 6 years?" His voice had a dangerous edge and was shaking with rage. All Might started to move towards the pair